So fantastic. Thanks so much for coming along today. My name's Kelvin Newman. I'm going to be talking to you today. I suppose it might be different from some of the other talks that you're going to have today, and I'm probably going to tell a bit of a story. So I'll tell you a bit about my experience. I don't know how widely valuable that is. What I hope is there'll be some lessons in that can be appropriate to you. I've certainly tried to frame it with some useful bits towards the end, but I do think it's often interesting to kind of discover how people have gone about their journey, and I'm sure there may be some applications that might be useful to you. And of course, hopefully we'll have plenty of time towards the end for any questions that you might well have. So my title today is How to Never Work a Day in Your Life, which I must confess is a little bit of a bait and switch. How I created a relatively fun job that's quite enjoyable and has some pretty decent perks. Didn't really have the same ring to it when I was asked to draw together a title for the programme. But hopefully, whilst it might not be quite as extravagant as never working a day again in your life, I hope that there'll be some useful bits that will help you wherever you are in this kind of journey of careers. So, to start off, I probably ought to introduce myself a bit. My name is, as I said, Kelvin Newman. I'm the founder of Brighton SEO, which I'll tell you far more of the story of. What I think is also perhaps interesting, and again, maybe subtly different, is this isn't kind of one of those stories where someone's went, you know what, I'm going to start up a business, work all the hours God sends, and kind of come up with this genius idea, right? That's not necessarily how this came about. It's kind of interesting that we span out of an existing business, Site Visibility, who have been involved in wired Sussex for a very, very long time. So a big part of our story is kind of the ability to create a business, to create a job within a larger existing organisation, as opposed to kind of this mythical startup approach that I think is interesting and common, but perhaps didn't necessarily appeal to me. But I've also got to start off with another confession, not only around the title. Inadvertently, by organising this big Brighton event, I've become very associated with with Brighton, but I'm actually from Worthing, which is famous for pretty much one thing, and they don't even do that anymore, which was the Birdman competition where people jump off the pier. But I love Worthing, but I also love Brighton. But I always feel like this fraud. People come down to Brighton and say, where should I go out in Brighton? It's like, I've not been out in Brighton since I was in uni. I can tell you what was a good pub 4 names ago. But the story, essentially, if I were to sum it up in 2 slides, are these following ones. So I started organising a pub meet-up in an upstairs room with this pub, which is the Quadrant by the Clock Tower. And now, I'd like to pretend there was a huge sophisticated plan for how we got here, but I now organise probably the biggest search marketing conference in the world, where 3.5 people come along to the Brighton Dome. To the Brighton Centre, the Dome previously. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that story because I think there's some interesting lessons that might apply there in terms of, developing things, developing businesses. But the reality is, although, again, as I say, it's an exciting business, we organise this huge event. Actually, the reality is a lot of the time me and Tom who's wandering around today, actually, spend a lot of time assembling stupid stuff I've bought off eBay, rather than kind of having this clever, sophisticated plan. But let's tell you the story. So once upon a time, I decided it would be quite cool to get a group of SEO mates. So some of you may be familiar with SEO as a concept. It's not important to what we're talking about here today, but SEO is a particular type of digital marketing called search engine optimization. And search engine optimization is essentially a kind of marketing discipline, which Brighton is particularly well known for, actually. Lots of big agencies that deliver SEO based down here. There's kind of a combination of web design, a combination of PR, social media marketing, and kind of all of those sort of marketing disciplines mixed together, but also a technical marketing discipline. So if those of you are kind of interested in a career, SEO is a particularly good one to get into in Brighton. But it is, I'll confess, a little bit geeky, right? It's fundamentally about the process of how do you tweak your website, how do you tweak your marketing to ensure that you do a bit better when people are making a search query for Brighton hotels, or they're searching for flights to New York, or searching for any of these related terms. So I got a group of people together. It kind of been happening informally beforehand in the pub to talk shop. And the idea was that we could share ideas, talk about search marketing and interesting stuff that really you couldn't talk to your friends about it, right? Because they would fall asleep or think that you were super dull. So that first event, I didn't expect anyone to show up. In fact, actually, there was the first event we just went and talked to the pub. And then the second event was, well, actually, if we get a projector, and project onto the wall, then we can go to the pub at lunchtime rather than waiting till after work. So that was kind of how it very first came about. So we had that first event. I didn't think there was going to be more people showing up than we were having speaking, but word got out. There was room for 20 people. 30 people showed up. So the next time we moved to community base, which had room for 100 people, and 120 people showed up. And then we went to the Salis Benny, and then we went to the Corn Exchange, and then we went to the concert hall in the Dome, and then we took lots of space in the Dome, and last September we ended up in the Brighton Centre. So this kind of increasing popularity that we had sort of gave us an indication that we might be on to something. So the idea was a sort of free industry conference talking about real issues with practical advice from people who ideally sort of know what they're talking about. And that was how Bright NSA was born. And since we've seen this kind of conference continue to grow into this beautiful, if scarily large thing we have today. And essentially what it is a place where search marketers meet, learn, and this is our real ambition, right? Discover ways to do their job a little bit better. That's kind of what we're trying to do, just a little bit better. And this isn't like, and this has kind of perhaps been part of our success. I think it's part of, it's kind of a Brighton mentality to this as well. So they're not like your usual digital trade shows where you're herded round a bunch of exhibition stands while overzealous salespeople desperately try and scan your badge or give you a business card, where they might have 10,000 people through the door over 3 days, but all of the stages only seat 20 people. You know, that's not the approach that we've got. So we're not like a big trade show, though we are kind of that scale now. And we're not like a lot of the digital conferences. So there's a lot of specialist search conferences out there that are really, really good, but they're like 1,500 quid to attend. And you have to, this is a bit over the top here, but you kind of have to remortgage your house to sit in a generic hotel or football club function room in West London and get generic advice. So kind of we've tried to find there's a place between that, and it's worked quite well for us. So part of what we say is that we're digital marketers, and I'm a search marketer, not an event organiser. And we play on that a lot, because the reality is you may not necessarily appreciate this when you're going to a lot of marketing events or digital events or any kind of industry event, that the reality is a lot of the people who are responsible for organising that, not just kind of the event managers, but even the people who are programming those events, who are determining this is what we want to have in this talk, this is who we want to speak, are 1 week they're kind of programming an internet marketing event, and the very next week they're programming a pharmaceuticals event, and then the week after that they're doing oil and gas, and then the week after that they're doing a medical event. They don't love the topic. And that's kind of, I think, what's helped us out, right, that we've got this. And we do kind of try to worry about how to put on a decent event first and then worry about how we make money later, which is pretty much the opposite of the rest of the industry. And I think that's kind of an interesting lesson to think about in general, which is that kind of, sometimes people are surprised it's a free event when other ones are 1,500 quid, how do you make money? But we do. We've got sponsorship, we've got VIP tickets, we've got kind of lots of different channels and approaches of ways that we make money. But kind of thinking about how do we make the most successful thing we can and then think about the monetising has been helpful for us. And that a lot of starting small allowed us to do that. Right, so when you're doing the first initial event, when it's kind of someone puts 50 quid behind the bar, you don't need to worry quite so much about how you're going to make money from that. And doing a few of those to sort of establish our credibility, to test things out, to see if we like doing it, has been a kind of really powerful lesson. I'm often kind of asked for people who are they want to program events and organise events. They'll often ask the question, so, how should you get started? And I kind of say, do the one that's going to risk the least amount of money, and then see if you do it. And I think that's a good approach in business in general. But that worked quite well. So it's become very successful, as I've sort of alluded to, and I hope giving you a sense. So yeah, this April's event that's coming up in 22 days, not that we're counting. We had 3,500 people register for that event in under 5 minutes. And part of that is because that's our marketing objective. We could slow that down instantaneously, right? We could launch it in batches. We could ballot the tickets, right? We could start charging for every single ticket, but we don't, because that becomes a really good marketing thing as well. I think scarcity is a really powerful marketing thing to consider as well. Think about that also when you're kind of doing this career stuff as well. It's kind of like actually using your own scarcity as a skill set's an important one there as well. So hopefully that's given a bit of the sense. As I say, we were spun out of a business that kind of allowed us this opportunity to kind of experiment, start small, while still having the day job in inverted commas. And that kind of ability to experiment with things around work is really important. Again, other good advice that I'd offer to people who are looking to develop or expand their career would be side projects are incredible, right? If you can find an hour a night, 5 nights a week, you're spending 20 hours a week on a particular project, that will quite possibly end up being a business in its own right that could become your own job in the future. If not, it sets you up to genuinely demonstrate you've got this expertise. So if you're looking to do a search marketing, apply for a search marketing job, if you can demonstrate I worked on a charity project and their search rankings improved, or if you're looking to get a social media job and you're managing social media accounts, Instagram accounts that have followers, all of these ways of demonstrating your experience is really good. I'm a big fan of side projects. We were quite fortunate that side project was allowed to kind of operate within the day job. And I think that's a good thing for people who are running businesses who might be here to kind of accommodate that, because they end up becoming quite big things. So what are sort of some of my more practical lessons for people to develop a career or expand a career or change career in digital? Let's try and make it a little bit more practical, maybe. Now, I think it's important to sort of develop a bit of a philosophy, and this will probably sound a bit wanky and tarty, I apologise. And this isn't actually me developing a philosophy, I'm reading my emails, but it sort of makes me look moody, enigmatic and thoughtful, so I thought that was a good thing to give you the impression that I had. But what I mean by that is that this world of work is kind of incredibly complex. There's lots of challenges in it, and particularly when you start running businesses, it becomes very tricky to sort of navigate the world in which you have to operate in. And having a bit of a philosophy for how you would like to do things, I think is incredibly helpful. Now, everybody's philosophy on that will be very, very different. I'm going to share with you 3 books that I found particularly helpful when forming that. They might be interesting to you. Equally, they might be very early noughties when I was reading these and maybe feel a bit dated now. They might not appeal to your kind of personality at all. But what I hope the practical thing is not, here are 3 books, read them, they'll change your life. That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is there will be books, there will be speakers, there will be other businesses you'll be inspired by. Having that is incredibly powerful. So for me, it was like books like The 4-Hour Workweek, probably again a bit of a missold title like that. That's about delegation, that's about remote working, that's about distributed teams. That was incredibly, formative on my way of doing business. This 3,500 person event we do twice a year, I'm the only full-time member of staff working on it. The other members of staff are working a few days a week around childcare and around other responsibilities and other projects. We don't all sit in the same office. That's things that kind of the 4-Hour Workweek, and also Rework is really important as well. Big fan of Rework as a book as well, which again talks about distributed teams, about kind of some of the myths of startup culture that I don't think is particularly powerful. And if maybe you're kind of more interested in, you don't want to start your own business, you just want to progress, Linchpin's probably one that I particularly advise as well. And that's about becoming an integral member of a team and understanding your value, being able to communicate that value, and then potentially that being useful in the process of salary negotiation and all of these sorts of stuff. Now, like I say, they might be helpful to you. There will be other books that you will find, but I think particularly if you're kind of going through this process, I want to change my career, I want to get a promotion, I want to start my own business up. That process of kind of starting to assess and appraise and, get a sense of I like this, but I don't like that is really, really powerful. I'm a big fan of also when sort of identify, I keep saying sort of today, I apologise. I'm a fan of when kind of constructing things to think about what you're in tension with or what you're objecting to. So kind of a big part of the process of like identifying what Bright NSA was as a business was identifying what we weren't. And I think that's again often helpful in that career side of things. It's probably easier to determine the type of job you don't want than the job you do want. And in the process of determining the job you don't want, there may be what the other one is presents itself. And I do think I'm probably missing a word here. It's much easier to create the perfect job or a really good job for you than it is to find one. So advice that worked very, very well for me is I kind of wanted to have some elements of running my own business, but didn't want to do that fully myself. The ability to work in an organisation where I was allowed to do that site visibility allowed me to do that. It might well be that there's a really clear, perfect role for you, but you're not seeing people advertising that role. Find an organisation that will allow you to do a job now that's going to reward you and you're going to benefit from, but then it's much easier to persuade people to invest in an internal project sometimes than it is to do other things as well. So think about that process of kind of creating the job is one to think about as well. And I do have to say, I think I don't know. I get the impression from some of the talks I've been in already today, most people here are kind of more in terms of how do I find those roles rather than how do I start up a business. But most of that kind of founder, CEO, the social network and all of these kind of stuff, it's rubbish, right? That myth of the founder is incredibly useless. In fact, I'm kind of a big fan of, being able to pay the mortgage or the rent and, take holiday. Controversial ideas, but I do think they're quite powerful. So I think sometimes it's important to kind of consider how you can make that work as well as just this kind of mythical role of the boss and the founder. So a few other bits of practical advice to kind of wrap us up as well. You will have a value to a business in the market. And I think a mistake that sometimes I see people make is they don't really appreciate that in either direction, right? So maybe they don't appreciate the value of their skills, so therefore lowball the types of roles that they're looking for. A bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect where people who have good skills tend to underestimate their abilities. So they don't necessarily appreciate that. So you need to understand the value of your skills, both in terms of what other companies would pay or if you were a freelance for that as well, or the opposite, and you're overvaluing, right? So you need to understand, well, if I was going to look at this roles, what would the other types of people who'd be applying for that, what skill sets do they have? Look at the LinkedIn profiles of the people who are already in those roles in the organisations. Before they started that role, did you have similar levels of experience to those as well? So that will feel weird, right? You will feel incredibly self-conscious kind of starting to go, how do I compare to that person, right? But doing that in kind of a pragmatic way is often helpful. And when you're doing your work as well, just really think about the process of automation as well. A big part of why you can't see the typewriter there, but a big part of why I think we've been successful as an event is that we've had smaller teams than other events of similar scale have. And a big part of the reason we've been able to do that is because we've avoided some of the costs of having kind of big offices and the like, but actually using software and being efficient is a big part of it. We have good project management systems, we have good event management systems. We use Google Forms rather than kind of managing emails, which sounds like the least sexy thing you'll hear today, but that saves us a good couple of hours every day, which kind of has made my life, I've got more time to do the things that I'm more interested in. And finally, there's a really long link there. If you search for Winging It or Guardian Winging It, or I'll share the link afterwards, there's a really powerful article written by Oliver Berkman. And I think this is, again, a lesson that's really helped me along the way, which is I've often thought of my experience of adulthood thus far as one of incrementally discovering that there's no institution or walk of life in which everybody is just winging it. Right? People are making it up as they go along. Anyone who stands up and pretends that they've got a amazing plan for how everything's going to work and how it all fits together, how they got their first job and the plan of how that career progressed, they are lying to you, or they're post-rationalising what actually happened. That article presents it, gives you all the psychological stuff behind it and all of that kind of thing, but that is the case, right? So don't be afraid of that. Embrace that. Embrace the kind of the uncertainty that presents and use that to kind of take advantage. So, to wrap things up, I actually want to ask two favours of you now, if that's all right. So the first one is we're planning on so the next Bright NSA is coming up in a couple of weeks, and in a last minute plan, we've decided to work with the guys at Buy Some Beer I don't know if you know those. And we're brewing a Bright NSA beer. And we've got 2 labels and I can't decide. And this has literally come in this morning. So I thought, well, I've got a group of potential focus group right here. So let's go. So we've got this version. It's going to be called Sellout, a tenuous brand extension from the people at Brighton SEO. So we've got this version. So this is like the yellow. You can't read that, don't worry. But kind of, we've got this yellow variation. It's the yellow labels there. Or we've got the blue labels. Yellow, blue. Very similar, I know, but this is what design comes down to when you can't decide. So, hands for yellow. See, now that's not what I wanted the answer to be. Anyway, and then blue. So, yet more proof I'm consistently wrong on these kind of things. So there we go. I'll have to send an email to our designer, so we do the yellow one. And the other one is as well, this might not be appropriate for everyone, but you might know someone. So, on the day of the event, which is the 7th of April, we often, the events, as I say, the tickets are sold out. We're often looking for volunteers to help us for like an hour in the morning with the registration process and handing out bits and pieces. Once that hour's done, you get a ticket for the rest of the day for free and it's all sorted. So if you know anyone who is up for that, it'd be amazing to hear from them. The address is hey@roughagenda.com, not .co. I just mucked up my line of spacing. But thanks very much, everybody, for your time. I don't know if anyone's got any particular questions. I will share these slides at slideshare.net/Kelvin Newman as I spill my water over my laptop. Thanks very much for your time, everybody. And